in light of Plan B restrictions, he also said that we need to learn to live with COVID. In his reply, Boris Johnson said he was very sorry to have received his resignation. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he understands why the Brexit minister has chosen to go.
He's an outstanding public servant, and I think that the way Brexit was done and how we achieved that and achieved those successes, he's been a central architect of that. So I wish him the best, but I do understand his reasons. He's a principled man. Principled people do resign from the government. I know all about that, and that's something that's a decision for him to take.
New research has found that Omicron might be less efficient at attacking the lungs than earlier COVID variants. A study by Cambridge University concluded the virus has mutated to avoid antibodies, but this can reduce its ability to replicate in the lungs. This would make it less likely to cause severe disease. Meanwhile, nearly 1 million vaccines were administered in England yesterday. That's a record high. Thousands have been protesting in Brussels against new restrictions sparked by the Omicron variant. Protesters, seen carrying placards reading "Enough is enough," marched against the government's strong advice to get vaccinated. Police were deployed after previous protests experienced pockets of violence, arrests and injuries. The Belgian march follows similar action seen yesterday in Paris and in London. Germany is set to tighten restrictions on travel from the UK from 11 p.m. tonight. German nationals, residents and transit passengers will all be exempt. Anyone entering Germany from Britain, whether vaccinated or not, will need a negative PCR test and will have to quarantine for 14 days. It comes as the Netherlands enters a full lockdown until at least the middle of next month. A 10-year-old girl has died and another child is in hospital after being hit by a car in Oldham in Greater Manchester last night. A 42-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and driving under the influence. At least 146 people have died in the Philippines following the strongest typhoon this year. It's understood at least 10 others are missing and 13 are injured. Officials do expect the number of deaths to rise after landslides and extensive flooding elsewhere in the country. And award-winning architect Lord Richard Rogers has died at the age of 88. He's the man behind the design of the Millennium Dome, as well as the Senedd Building in Cardiff, the Lloyd's Building in London, and the Pompidou Centre in Paris. That's the latest. I'll be back with more news in an hour.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather cloudy for many areas, but staying clearer in the far west. Let's take a look at the details. Across the southwest, there'll be some coastal and hill fog this evening, particularly along southern areas. Otherwise, this evening will be largely dry and clear, but becoming a little chillier. Further east, we'll continue to see a lot of cloud across the southeast of England, with some patchy drizzle across eastern coasts through this evening. South Wales will benefit from the clearer spells first thing this evening, though some mist and murk will affect the coast. It'll be chilly inland there. For the Midlands, another cloudy evening, though it will become less foggy for most, staying dry too, and by the morning it'll feel a little brighter and milder than this morning. Further north, it has been a very murky day, but overnight cloud will lift up, so less fog, but remaining overcast tonight, and therefore temperatures won't drop off much at all this evening. For southern Scotland, the story is very similar. More cloud to come, but temperatures staying very similar to the daytime. Cold and clearer for areas further north and west. Northern Ireland will continue to see some of that mist and murk through this evening, with temperatures in mid-single figures across the country, though largely dry at night. The rest of the night will see more cloud arrive in western areas, but a brighter start to Monday. And that's how your weather is shaping up overnight and for tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About, your weekend fix, where I pose a question that needs plenty of time for discussion. And today, we need to talk about alcohol. If booze were invented today, my hunch is that there is no way it would pass muster with elfin safety. And the hipster trend of drinking mysterious concoctions from jam jars in prohibition-themed speakeasies wouldn't be a voguish novelty, but an underground movement where only the most bohemian would congregate to get collectively punch drunk. Were it not for the biblical endorsement by one Lord Jesus Christ, who saw fit to turn water into wine, I wonder whether fermented grape juice would be granted the moral high ground above equally noxious narcotics that it presently enjoys. After all, if you've had the hangover from hell, it's quite apparent how poisonous the stuff can be. But perhaps more striking is quite how pernicious being under the influence is when it comes to public and personal health. Drunkenness accounts for over a third of admittances to A&E, over a third of incidents of domestic violence, and a third of all suicides. Alcohol causes at least 20 deaths a day in the UK. And yet, despite government warnings, public health campaigns, sin taxes, age restrictions, tougher driving laws, and an array of booze-free faux plonk, we're still chugging it back like sailors on leave, especially the boomer boozers. Those aged between 45 and 64 are today most likely to drink, with 16 to 24-year-olds the least. How times have changed. Yet, if you are a problem drinker, and we must certainly try to find out what that means, it's pretty hard to avoid the stuff. There's almost an established cultural contempt for the brave friend who nobly states that they'll only go out for one or two, or perhaps deign to not drink at all. Heaven forfend. Being trolleyed, squiffy, plastered, ratted, tiddly, blotto, hammered or wasted is so normalised it has been a regular trope in comedy from Dickens to Ab Fab, while drinking is regularly promoted as a desirable lifestyle choice. Given that critics of alcohol argue that it does as much physical harm as most Class A drugs, the image of settling into an airport lounge with huge advertisements of a lovely syringe at 30,000 feet makes you realise how prevalent a tipple as a standard of comfort has become. But do we all really need to turn teetotal? We've been knocking it back in the West since before the Romans even invented the vomitorium. And I'm not one to besmirch a night on the lash or the joy of a well-breathed claret while watching Talking Pints. But how many of us really have an honest grip on our consumption? There's one thing being a problem drinker and quite another having a problem with drink. Dear viewer, most of us do. From rubbish sleep to expanding waistlines, dehydrated skin to dreadful moods, the midweek muzzy head to the weekend post-excess sofa coma. If we were to line up a conveyor belt of what we've knocked back during the week, for a significant number of us, the litany of liquor would be pretty thought-provoking. For others, it's deadly. So what is the answer? What are the warning signs of being at the bottom of a bottle too often? And while we all have the capacity to say to ourselves, put a cork in it, why is that so hard? We all know a celebrity who has succumbed to a lethal habit, and we probably have that one mate who becomes an unexploded landmine in Wetherspoons. But what about us? Are we stacking up the tinnies to an early grave? Is that 4-pack killing your 6-pack? Are those beer goggles blinding you to the real truth about your guilty pleasure? I'm Alex. I'm 37, and I love a good white burgundy with plenty of oak. Today, we really need to talk about alcohol. Well, let's start up in Scotland. Record numbers of drugs deaths capture the headlines this summer. The situation was described by the Scottish Drugs Minister as our national shame. But there was far less hand-wringing when it emerged later that there'd been an even bigger increase in alcohol-related deaths in the same period, a rise of 17% on the previous year, compared to a 5% rise in drug-related deaths. In fact, the total number of deaths related to alcohol north of the border were almost equivalent to deaths related to all the other drugs combined. Well, why is no one talking about this? Let's first speak to Alison Douglas, Chief Executive of Alcohol Focus Scotland. Alison, why do you think people aren't making a big noise when it comes to the number of deaths from alcohol happening at present?
Well, hi, Alex. I think, you kind of put your finger on it, that we are very accepting of alcohol's role in our society, and unfortunately, that means that we are almost accepting of the harm that it causes. I suppose there was a difference between the alcohol deaths and the drug deaths in that we had been seeing a downward trajectory in alcohol deaths in Scotland for a number of years. And suddenly we've seen this increase of 17% in 2020, which we think is probably a lot to do with the impact of the pandemic on people's drinking habits. There's a lot of evidence that people, particularly heavier drinkers, were drinking more during the pandemic because of the social isolation and the stress and pressures, many people's livelihoods being at risk, that kind of thing. So it was truly shocking. And I think you're right to compare the attitudes, beliefs and response to the level of problems that we have between alcohol and drugs, because alcohol is killing very many more people, but it's also having a huge effect on people beyond the drinker. And I think this is something a lot of our narrative is really about, well, this is my choice about whether I drink and how much I drink, and I'm not affecting anybody but myself. The reality is somewhat different, that friends and family are being affected. During the COVID crisis, again, people were hothoused with their families. Many people were contacting services saying they hadn't really realised just what an alcohol problem their partner or another member of their household had, and that they were really concerned now that they were seeing it up close. There were a lot of reports to the NSPCC about worrying about children being in households where parents were drinking. So yes, it is something that we have a kind of collective amnesia about, or unwillingness to recognise the full extent of the impact of alcohol on us and on those around us.
So what can be done? Because, I mean, if we're going to be realistic and pragmatic about this, we're never going to ban alcohol, are we? I mean, the nighttime economy is too vast. In fact, the amount that the food and drinks industry give to this country's GDP is enormous, and it would seem extremely heavy-handed to go down that route. But we've tried everything. We've got sin taxes, we've got public health campaigns. Where are we going wrong? Why haven't we managed to get this problem and start to sort it out?
Well, you say we've done everything that we can, but actually at UK level, we're really not implementing any of the 3 best buys that the World Health Organization recommends. So those are controlling the price, restricting the availability and regulating alcohol marketing. We're not really doing any of those things at UK level. We've got a taxation system that is completely unrelated to the amount of alcohol in products. So that the government has committed to reviewing the alcohol duty system, and we hope that they will link it to how much alcohol is in the products, because the more alcohol, the more harm is caused. As I said, availability, we now see alcohol sold in hairdressers and cinemas, virtually every corner shop. In England, you've got more permissive licensing hours than we have here in Scotland, but the more readily available it is, the easier it is to purchase and consume alcohol, and more normalised it becomes because it's part of the wallpaper. And then on alcohol marketing, we have a global alcohol industry company which spends millions and millions of pounds telling us why alcohol is essential to having a good time and to being popular and having a great social life. And that affects us. It affects our perceptions of alcohol. And, if you think back, say 40 years ago, people socialize, if you dropped round to somebody's house, they offered you a cup of tea. Nowadays, it's much more likely to be that glass of Chardonnay you were talking about earlier, Alex.
Well, do you know what? I do advocate a good glass of Chardonnay from time to time. But why is it in particular that the UK and especially Scotland seems to have an issue with this?
Well, Scotland does have more of an issue than a lot, than England as a whole. So we definitely drink more, and more of us die as a consequence of that. But parts of England have similar problems to Scotland. The northeast of England have similar scales of problems to those in Scotland. But I think, throughout the Western world, alcohol consumption has increased and has become normalised, and a lot of that's linked to us having disposable income. Nowadays, we see global alcohol corporations targeting emerging economies like India and Africa with particular products in those areas. So this is a global industry, and we cannot expect industry to regulate itself. Industry exists in order to make a profit for shareholders. So if we're going to try and combat the way in which alcohol is so heavily promoted and so readily available, then that has to be through government action. And as I said, the World Health Organization has a blueprint there which the UK government could follow in order to have an effective alcohol strategy. There basically is no UK alcohol strategy at the moment.
Alison, thank you for coming on and explaining that to us. That's Alison Douglas, CEO of Alcohol Focus for Scotland. Well, joining me now is Josh Connolly, who helps train helpline counsellors for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. What sorts of lessons do young people in this country learn about alcohol while they're growing up?
Well, I think one of the main things that you would say is that children that grow up in that kind of environment are fed the message that alcohol is more important than them. I think there's often a tendency to focus on the damage that's caused when a parent is actually drinking. But what we find with the helpline at NACOA is that a lot of these children are calling to discuss the behaviours that surround the ways that their parents drinking. And I think to bring it to some of the points that have already been mentioned, it's more about the relationship that their parents have with alcohol more than anything. And the messaging that these children get as a result of that relationship that their parents have with alcohol is ultimately that in and of themselves, they're not lovable. And so I think it's quite a deep-rooted problem. And at NACOA, we've seen a big increase since lockdown began. So the scale of the problem in that sense is huge. And most people that have grown up with a parent that drinks too much will tell you that the problems that they face are lifelong. Irrespective of what happens to the parent that drank when they were younger.
I mean, you went through this yourself, didn't you, Josh? I understand you lost your father when you were just 9 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I lost my dad when I was 9 years old, and actually went on to have struggles with alcohol myself too. And I sort of recognize now, as somebody who hasn't drank for nearly 10 years, that my relationship with alcohol was such because I believe I suffered from the same thing as my dad, which was untreated trauma in what I experienced when I was a child. And that was, my mum and dad being wrapped up in my dad's addiction and nobody being available for me and the experiences that I had. So it's, I grew up feeling lonely, and as a result, I used alcohol to escape the ways that I felt, and went on to have the same struggles as my dad, really.
There are a lot of people out there who probably tread a very fine line between what they can get away with doing when it comes to alcohol consumption and risky behaviours that really do affect their day-to-day lives. How on earth do you encourage those people who are unlikely to say, right, I need to check myself into Alcoholics Anonymous. How do you encourage those people to cut down their drinking when it seems so glamorous? And we seem to live in a society where if you say to your group of mates, "Do you know, I'm not drinking tonight," you know, it's almost like you said something heretical, you know, blasphemous.
Well, look, from a NACOA standpoint, NACOA are just there to support the impacts on the children. But from a personal perspective, to answer that question personally, alcohol's the only drug that I have to over-explain to people that I don't do, right? I think what would be really beneficial is if, rather than trying to look at what makes a problem drinker or where is the line, if we started to talk more about how your relationship is with alcohol, and had that kind of conversation, then it gives people a lot of scope. If you were to think of a relationship that you might have with another human being, right? If it got so toxic, you might say that that relationship is non-repairable and you should break it off and never have the relationship again. If that relationship was struggling, you may say that we need to make some alterations to that relationship in order for it to become more healthy, right? And I think that gives people scope. When we make it very binary, I think people start to panic and start to want to become defensive about their own relationship with alcohol, when actually not necessarily everybody needs to completely banish it or stop using it. Some people may just need to address their relationship with it. And, you know, we create those spaces for people by creating open conversation that are free from judgment and that actually allow people to explore where they're at and make their own decisions originally on what their relationship with alcohol is like.
As someone who works for NACOA, the National Association for Children of Alcoholics, have you been amazed at how many children are in a position where one or maybe both of their parents are heavy drinkers? Because it seems to me, as I've grown up, I meet people quite often these days who would turn around and say, my parents were problem drinkers. Is this an issue that perhaps is far greater than we give it credit for?
Well, look, we have statistics at NACOA that 1 in 5 children are living with a parent that drinks hazardously being enough to harm the people around them. So when we say 1 in 5, if the average classroom's got 30 people in it, we're talking about 6 children in every classroom, right, that are growing up with this. So this isn't a unique and isolated problem, right? This is huge scale. And it's something that we really do need to look much closer at. If you look at some of the statistics that you just said, at the beginning when we first started talking, you know, we've been so worried over the last 18 months about overwhelming the NHS. If we solved the alcohol problem and everything that brought, then that worry perhaps wouldn't have been there over the last year and a half. That's the scale of the problem that we're talking about. But again, I think what happens is the moment we start talking about it, it feels like we're bashing alcohol. People become defensive, and then the conversation gets shut down, and we don't go there. So I think we need much more open conversations in that sense.
Yeah, do you know, Josh, you've made me think of something. I was listening to an interesting news item on alcohol before coming on air, and I didn't realise, but South Africa was one of the only countries at the start of the pandemic to see a reduction in excess deaths because they actually enforced prohibition in order to alleviate some of the strain on hospitals. So what you say there actually has some, you know, credence tested out in real life, albeit not in the United Kingdom. What would be your message to people sitting at home today who drink regularly, who go to work regularly, they manage doing it both, they're not putting whiskey on their cornflakes, but they're coming home and opening the bottle of wine in the fridge, you know, as soon as they walk through the door. How do you encourage those people who are probably going way over their weekly allocation of units, but don't regard themselves as having a problem with alcohol?
Look, I would say that if they have a family around them and they're living with children, can they honestly look at themselves and say that the way in which they're drinking is not having an impact on their children? I think that's why the work that NACOA do can be so important to the conversation, because when we start thinking about the impact that it has on children, I think it forces us to be a little bit more honest about the whole situation. You know, NACOA has no kind of judgment on the way that anybody drinks. That's not what the charity exists for. It's there solely to support the children that are affected in that way. But what I would say is that if we can all start to reflect and start to think, you know, is my relationship with alcohol sending out certain messages to the people that are around me, particularly my children or my loved ones? And then I think that can help us to be a little bit more honest and actually start to think, this isn't just harming me, right? The way in which I drink isn't just about me, but actually has an impact on the people that I care about the most. And then perhaps that may help us to move towards addressing those relationships in a bit more of an open way.
Josh, thank you so much for your candour and for coming on today. And thank you, of course, for your hard work as well with what you do. Much needed. That's Josh Connolly from the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Well, we're going to continue this conversation throughout the show, and I really want to know what you think. No, not what you drink, what you think. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can also tweet me, of course, @gbnews. And I've put a poll up right now on the GB News Twitter feed asking, is alcohol more dangerous than Class A drugs? Now, what I'd recommend is have a listen to all of the debates we have during the course of this programme. You might get some information that you haven't heard before. You might find your mind being changed. But do cast your votes so at the end of the programme, I know what you, the nation, really thinks. You've just heard from Alison Douglas and Josh Connolly. After the break, I'm continuing this conversation with the experts Professor David Nutt, Michael Sargard, founder of A Sober Socials Group, and Michael Lambert of the Portsman Group, the body responsible for regulating the packaging, labelling and promotion of alcohol. See you in a couple of minutes. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
You know the thing. You'll say you'll just go for one or two. But you know, the problem with alcohol is it has the inherent power of being like kryptonite to common sense. Then, of course, when the barmaid asks if that's a double, you hear the immortal words, "Oh, go on then. It would be rude not to." Before you know it, you've snored yourself awake at 5 in the morning with a palate like sandpaper and a throbbing pain behind your eyes, and you're squeezing your temples and praying for sleep in the vain hope that the next day isn't a total write-off. But how much is too much? government advice can feel pretty austere to huge swathes of the population who bulldoze their way through weekly allocations of units in a couple of cocktails. But do we really understand the damage it's doing to us? And how reversible are the harms? When it comes to banning the booze, it would frankly take Taliban rule to extract the vat of vino from my gaggle of girlfriends manicured clause. But how can we really learn to imbibe those sage words, consume in moderation? And what would convince us to do so? Let's get in another round of opinions and try to get to the source of the issue. Well, first up, David Nutt, Professor of Neuropsychopharmacology at Imperial College London, an expert in substance abuse, joins me now. Professor Nutt, it's fantastic having you back on the programme. We've spoken previously about other drugs, but what about alcohol? I mean, to many of us, it just feels like such an innocuous, pleasant habit, but what effects does it have on the body?
Well, it affects pretty much every single part of the body, and the problem with alcohol is that the relationship or the harms are non-linear. The more you drink, the much more harm you get. So if you double your consumption from, say, half a bottle of wine a day to a bottle of wine a day, you increase the harms by about 6 to 8-fold. And that is why the government is keen for you to drink less, because every small reduction you produce in your drinking has a disproportionately greater beneficial effect on your health.
In terms of, what do you think the government guidelines are in the right place when it comes to units? It's a relatively confusing system, but it advocates, not really much more than a glass of wine a day. Is that about right? Because I think a lot of people tend to be drinking a lot more than that.
Well, the reality is if you drink to the government guidelines, it will have very little impact on your health. But if you drink above the government guidelines, then you will begin to impact on your health. And one of the reasons the book you say up on my shelf here, Drink Book, is there because in that book I look at the amount of months or years of life you lose if you drink above those guidelines. And if you drink at the old guidelines, for instance, it used to be 28 units for men and 21 for women, then that takes about 6 months off your life if you drink over about 40 years. So most people, I think, would say, well, that's not the end of the world. 6 months at the end of your life may not be a big problem. It is a problem, of course, if you happen to run into problems when you're very drunk and have a car accident or something. So, young people can be disproportionately affected by alcohol. But for most of us, the benefits of alcohol in moderation, if you can do that, outweigh the possible loss of a few months of life at the end.
In terms of if people have gone on a binge, if they think that they've, maybe had a few reckless years of their life, I don't know, say at university, does that leave lasting damage? If people decide, I want to quit the sauce now, I want to put myself in a healthier position, whether it's losing weight, getting better sleep, having better moods, how quickly can the body heal itself? Or do we actually leave lasting damage if we're high consumers of alcohol?
Well, for most of us, we don't leave lasting damage. I mean, the lasting damage comes in usually those young men who've got into fights or had traffic accidents where they damage their brain as a result of drinking. But for organs like the liver or the heart, cutting down or stopping in your 30s and 40s is one way of minimizing the harm. That healing will take place. That is absolutely the case. Yes.
Do you think in the UK we have a pragmatic and sensible relationship when it comes to regulating alcohol? Or do you think that we need to start perhaps recasting our gaze and potentially putting it in the same category as drugs that are outlawed?
Well, it clearly is a drug, and it's clearly been exempted from drug laws by the government. They've made that explicit. They know it's harmful, but they've decided that the social benefits, both in terms of people enjoying it and also the taxation that it brings in, outweighs the harms. Of course, they don't. Alcohol still is a net cost to society. We subsidize drinking, and that's actually what we should be doing. There are two things we really should be doing. One is to try to get the pricing of alcohol back to where it was back in the 1950s and 60s, because the actual real cost of alcohol has dropped by about 2/3 in the last 50 years or so. And that's led to us drinking more and led it to being more of a problem, particularly in young people. And the other thing we should be doing is trying to find ways of giving people the sociability and the conviviality and the experiences they get with alcohol, but without alcohol. And that's something I've been working on for a long time, because alcohol is a really good drug for socializing, and that's why most of us use it. But we could find alternatives. It didn't give you hangovers and didn't damage your liver, and that's completely a tractable scientific problem, and I've been working on for a long time. And I think we should be encouraging other groups as well as my own to do that.
And so how do you do that? How do you potentially have fun without alcohol?
Well, what we've been working on is developing alternative drinks which have elements in them that mimics the good effects of alcohol, like the relaxation, the sociability, but don't get you really drunk and don't damage your liver and don't give you hangovers. We're trying to, in science can focus its attention on the positive effects of alcohol, mimic those in the brain without targeting much less the negative effects. It's just a simple question of finding the right molecules. We're looking at them in plants, herbs that have been around for a long time. We're also inventing specific molecules that we can put into drinks that will do what we want alcohol to do with or much less of the harms.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to tasting it if you ever get round to finishing it and releasing it. Professor Nutt.
Alexa, send me an email and I'll send you a bottle of the new stuff. All right?
Oh, I'm not going to turn that down. It's coming your way. Don't you worry. And I'll be raising a glass to you. Thank you so much. Always great having you on the show. Thanks, Prof. Well, let's find out someone who is trying to have a good time without the booze. According to Alcohol UK, sobriety is on the rise among younger people following lockdown. And Michael Sargard is founder of the Southend Sober Socials. Michael, how's it going?
It's been really positive, actually. It came about because I decided to go sober earlier this year. I've been alcohol dependent, and lockdown, I think a lot of us have been drinking more. And I wanted to continue socialising, but in my town of Southend, after 6 p.m, pubs were the only option. There was no sort of cafes available. You could go to the cinema, maybe, and the theatre, but I wanted to go out, and I wanted to have that experience you'd have at a local pub. Where you'd go and meet people that you knew, maybe listen to some music, and I just wanted to be without alcohol. There's two reasons for that, really. First of all, in early sobriety, I didn't want to be surrounded by the temptation of alcohol, because it had a pretty catastrophic impact on my life. But secondly, after I was comfortable being around people drinking, if you've ever been nominated driver, I think you can probably sympathise that if everyone else is drinking and getting pretty trolleys, and you're the sober one who's waiting for them all to finish, it can be a little bit boring. It's not meant in a nasty way, but if you're not at the same level, you're not having such a good time. So I thought, well, let's see if anybody else wants to join me, post into a local Facebook group. And I've now got sort of 30 to 40 people every Saturday who are going out, socialising, music, comedy, and actually learning to have a good time and let your hair down without the booze, without having to have a drug to make you sociable. And I think that's probably one of the most beneficial things you can do for your health.
Yeah, tell us about the sort of effects it's had on you personally. Give us a good old list. Promote your sobriety to us. Why would we want to follow in your footsteps?
Well, my self-confidence has grown. I find that actually people like me without the booze. I feel healthier. I feel more awake. My sleeping's got better. My relationships with my family has improved. I no longer wake up with that sort of Sunday doom about what did I do, who have I got to apologise to. I've got more attention, I'm better at work, I'm a better friend to people, and I just feel like I now have a much better social life. And not only that, but I remember it. So that's just my start for 10, really.
Sounds interesting. And what has been the reaction from friends and family? Because it is curious, isn't it, in this country? I think, in fact, in a lot of countries, when you say, I'm not going to drink tonight, people look at you as if you said you're going to go deliberately run over cats on the highway.
Exactly. No, it does get that reaction sometimes. And I've heard it said before that alcohol is the only drug that you get judged for not using. People wouldn't say, look, why aren't you snorting cocaine? It's like if it was some sort of weird thing to do. But when I first sort of came out, as it were, as having a problem with alcohol a while back, and I was expecting well, maybe to lose some friends along the way or to be judged. And actually, what I got was a load of support. And I think a lot of people privately have experienced a bit of a troubled relationship with alcohol. I'm not saying that everybody is like a secret alcoholic, but I think a lot of people have experienced either themselves or have experienced as a family member of someone who suffers a bad relationship with alcohol. And where I was expecting judgment, largely I got support. It's been really positive to have people, cheering me along the way.
Michael, we're cheering you along the way, and I'm hoping that your personal story has some influence on someone watching today who might well find you an inspiration. Keep up the good work. That's Michael Sargood, founder of Southend Sober Socials. Well, joining me in the studio now is Matt Lambert, CEO of the Portman Group, the social responsibility body and regulator for alcohol labelling, packaging and promotion in the UK. Matt, fantastic to have you here. One of my first guests was saying that the WHO has a blueprint for how countries should manage alcohol, and it goes down to things like packaging and labelling and promotions, amongst other things, and said that, well, actually, the UK doesn't really follow any of that. How bad are we, or how bad are you when it comes to encouraging people to keep drinking?
Yeah, well, that's not really true, because the latest draft of the WHO action plan is actually calling out self-regulatory bodies like the Portman Group, which for 30 years has done a tremendous job managing and controlling the regulation, the labelling and the sponsorship of alcoholic products. And we've taken about 170 products off the market in 25, 30 years. Change them, or we work with the alcohol industry all the time to encourage them to take a moderate approach to the way that they promote alcoholic products. And so I think there is a role for self-regulation. It's been a tremendous success in this country for a generation.
And what sort of things are you looking for? What is inappropriate when it comes to the promotion of alcohol?
Well, anything that appeals to people who are vulnerable, encourages minors to drink alcohol, or confuses an alcoholic product with a product designed for minors would be a kind of absolute red line area for us. Yeah.
And in terms of, when we look at alcohol in the British culture, it seems to me whatever you do when it comes to managing the promotion of products on billboards, supermarket shelves and in sports, you just have to flick through TV channels and there's going to be a comedy on or a drama series, and people are going to be, opening the tinnies and popping the corks and the champagne and whatnot. How effective can you be in trying to help Brits not overconsume?
Yeah, well, alcohol is a part of our culture and has been for hundreds, probably nearly 1,000 years, really, in the UK and across Europe. But the key to this is drinking in moderation, and the vast majority of people in this country, nearly 80%, are drinking within the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines, or not drinking at all. And to the point that Michael was making earlier, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people who choose to not drink or choose to drink a low and no alcohol product. A large number of drinkers now drink alcohol some of the time and low or no alcohol products some of the time as well. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what we shouldn't be doing is demonising those who enjoy a drink in moderation.
I'd be demonising myself, so we're not going to be doing that. But in terms of, you're talking about children and, not promoting alcoholic products to children. That makes absolute sense.
Absolutely.
But demographically, it's shifted somewhat, and it's now actually people in their sort of late 40s, 50s and early 60s who are the big British boozers. How can we encourage those people? How might you want to make sure that those people are well aware of the personal risk to their health if they're having more than just the odd glass on an evening?
Well, I think that, there is some evidence of what you just said, but I think that the real bonus there is the other point that you make, is that I think there's been a 30% increase in the number of young people under 24 who don't drink alcohol at all, and as I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with that. And what we did see, during the pandemic actually was overall a reduction in drinking. But there are a few people, there's 4% of the population probably, who can't really handle their drink, and they need targeted help, and they need proper support. And sadly, one of the bad side effects during the pandemic is a lot of that support network and health network was not available to them for reasons that we know, because we're all in lockdown and so on. So targeted response to help those who actually cannot handle their drink, and for people who know people with those kind of problems, to encourage them to get help. For example, you can go to DrinkAware, which is a body sponsored by the alcohol industry, which encourages moderation and offers help to people who feel that they cannot handle their drinking or drinking too much, or to those who think someone in their family or someone around them might be drinking too much, to encourage them to get that advice and targeted specialist help.
And do you think that we have a problem with alcohol here in the UK? I was quite surprised when I was researching for this programme and found out things like a third of A&E admissions are alcohol related. I mean, one assumes that's people, drunkenly falling over or punching people, as well as, being a paralytic. But are we essentially sleepwalking, or should I say drunkenly staggering, towards some sort of, dreadful future if we don't get a stronger handle on this?
Well, alcohol is a product which has to be, drunk in moderation, and we need to take it seriously for those who cannot. But, overall, some of those statistics that you mentioned are headed very much on the downward curve. For example, violence and alcohol-related issues and binge drinking and drink driving, all of these are down something like about 50% in the last 10 years. So a lot of the numbers are actually headed in the right direction. Of course, it would be difficult to imagine that if you follow the media. There seems to be a kind of drumbeat that says people are drinking more, there's a bigger problem. The key thing is that small group who cannot handle their drink and are drinking it to harmful levels, and to get targeted support and help for those.
Matt, thank you so much for coming into the studio, and you must be doing a good job for that. Good news at the end there, that things are getting a little bit better. Light at the end of the drunken tunnel at last. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now that we've heard what our guests have had to say, it's time for you, the viewer, to have the final word. Paul says, all my life I have drank heavily. I nearly died from it. I've stopped drinking from beyond my control. Don't get me wrong, I still give into it now and again. We'll try and stay on the right path there. Paddy says, the simplest way to massively cut alcohol issues is to make alcohol only available from pubs and clubs. This would give pubs a new lease of life and prevent underage consumption. No off licences, no selling from supermarkets. Interesting. Stuart says, all my life I was anti-alcohol until I started. Alcohol is worse than any drug put together. Joanne says, not everyone who drinks is a problem drinker, but equally drinking too much is bad for your health. Too much stigma surrounds liver-related deaths, automatically assumes a drink problem, must be an alcoholic. No one thinks it will happen to them. I think the youngsters today, despite what you said in your introduction, do drink more than we ever did. Seb says crack and heroin are much more destructive. Unfortunately, though, alcohol is readily available, which makes beating your addiction harder, as it's in all the corner shops. Well, that's all we've had time for today. It's been another fascinating romp through an important topic that we definitely need to discuss. The results of our poll is in. Is alcohol more dangerous than Class A drugs? 69% of you say no. 31% of you, however, think it is. I'm Alex Phillips, and you've been watching We Need to Talk About. And for the last hour, we've been talking about alcohol. That's it for today. See you next time.
So Richard Bartlett, you are the UK and Ireland manager of ClearNow, which is a global California-based company that specialises in customs clearance and managing logistics and supply chains. How did you end up in this job?
Quite bizarrely, actually. I had 16 years of running my own logistics company, specialising in Europe and worldwide. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I was involved with the Institute of Exports on the Brexit, helping many businesses, institutes, how to understand how Brexit was going to affect them on documentation, customs. And really I've been doing workshops, probably workshops every day for the last 3.5 years. Worked in Ireland, on the north and the south, in Newry and Dublin, worked for Irish Customs, HMRC. And then I've been brought into ClearNow on the supply chain to see a digitalised world. We're going into more digitalised under the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is the fundamental of trade around the world, based in Switzerland. And really our principle at ClearNow is to make the solution and make everything a lot smoother. So when goods come in, people have real time, they can sort things out. It has sustainability because obviously everything's digital. And we see ourselves as the Uber, as working with logistics companies, clearing goods, getting it to the end consumer, which is the most important.
So in a nutshell, before we drill down, how is it going for the UK in terms of the efficacy of our customs imports and exports procedures in a post-Brexit world? Is it getting smoother?
There's two ends to this, and this is what people have to understand. The UK on importing, so goods coming into the UK, is actually still in a transition period. So that's not changed. So goods are allowed to arrive into the UK with limited documentation and customs clearance, we call a simplified. For exporters, unfortunately, they were sold down the river on the first day of January. They was moving goods into Europe. Many issues at ports, at countries. Each of the 27 member states created their own customs procedure, which created a lot of confusion to a lot of businesses. Health certificates were required for just normal goods leaving the UK. And for exports, it's been a huge challenge. Anybody in parcels, anything that delivering into Europe, it's been probably a disaster for them. People dealing with Amazon. Amazon moved the production into Europe. They refused to help businesses and made the businesses in the UK have a subsidiary in Europe. That's caused major problems for the supply chain into Amazon, because now anybody exporting, anybody servicing Europe in anywhere within the European community, all the goods have to go into Amazon. That's created major problems for a lot of businesses in the UK.
Do you think the EU's made it particularly difficult for the UK?
I think the EU have just played by the book. I think the deal that we created, it's a deal there. I think what the EU have done, they've kept to the procedure. I don't think they've made it particularly easy. But we're certainly now starting to see businesses within UK starting to get used to it. I've done lengths and lengths of training on documentation, on customs, because you've got to remember the UK has always been part of a 28 member state. So when you're moving goods, for anybody today, you would move goods as if you was moving it from London to Manchester.
Yeah.
That suddenly changed overnight for a lot of business, and all of a sudden, to move goods, they've had to have the commodity codes, the Incoterms, all these critical areas that have huge effects on a British business.
Isn't it up to the British government, though, how it manages that challenge? Because that's the end of the operation that we're in charge of. They could keep it relatively easy if they wanted to, couldn't they?
I think they will, Liam, to be honest. I think for the faults, or however we describe it, I think the UK government have helped importers. They've helped people sustain or try and sustain the level of business that's imports coming in. Not sure on the exports, but unfortunately they don't have that control.
Yeah.
They can control what's coming in. they've been very good on some of the third country duties, if anybody's understand when you bring goods in. If you've not got the origin of the product, that then creates a dutiable rate, so a customer then has to pay, a business has to pay a duty. That's passed on to the consumer. So they've tried to reduce a lot of that to make the impact on businesses, on your supermarkets, from your supermarkets to normal business, toy industry. They've tried to keep that at a minimum. So they've done a lot of good things on that, but on the exports, that's been a huge challenge for a lot of exporters, and we have this divide.
To what extent are the issues at our ports that have developed over this summer, to what extent are they a Brexit phenomenon, so unique to the UK, and to what extent, Richard, are they a global phenomenon?
I think they're more global, Liam. I think we can't blame this on UK government. I think this is a global issue. I think we're so reliant on China and Asian markets to bring goods in, and the Asian market with COVID and the issues. I mean, just to give
a
you
lot of closed factories.
Absolutely, they rely. I mean, China worked on zero COVID, so when there was any issues within a port would be closed down. We had Shenzhen closed this year for over 26 days. That's a huge effect because it's the backlog. Goods are not then coming out, and what's happening then is goods are being stuck at Felixstowe, obviously because we've got a supply chain problem. And then the goods, obviously, as the containers come in, because certain containers can only come into Felixstowe, and that's a big issue because then they can't release the goods because there's no space. So they move into Rotterdam, as we say, release the goods there. That people have to understand that is a cost to British businesses who ultimately then pass it on to the consumer, and that's one of the biggest worries. And I think this is where the UK government need to tackle this. They need to look at it. We need an infrastructure.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.